You know, listening to this debate, as I have been, you wouldn't know it, but there is a quiet but growing anxiety in the country. You can feel it in conversations around the community, those who work in our offices, the people who you potentially go to school with, the ones on the pickleball court. You hear a pause before a young couple answers a question, so when are you buying? You see, the construction worker who's constantly checking the listings, the articles about litigation for those who were so close but just couldn't close on what they bought pre-construction. But the housing market in Canada is not just cooling, it's absolutely cracking for these people, for people who want to get into the housing market. In Toronto, starts have fallen to 30-year lows. Last month, fewer than 300 homes and fewer than 100 condos sold in the entire city. That's nearly 90% below average. And 75% of people who don't own a home in that city believe that they never will own a home. Think about that. That's now a story in Canada. 3/4 of people who don't own a home will have already given up on the idea that they will own a home. I repeated that because I want you to let that sink in. This is a country where the dream of home ownership has always been there and should continue to be there. It's not a market correction, it's not a cycle, it's an entire generation losing faith in what their parents and grandparents and those who came before them had in this country. And it's moments like this, in a real crisis, that leadership and action actually matter. Because when your house is on fire, you don't call the fire department for a literature review on combustion. And that's exactly what we're talking about. It's exactly what this government is doing with, again, yet another piece of legislation on housing. The flames are obvious, the young people are locked out, the renters are squeezed, builders are stalled, and jobs are disappearing. Now imagine instead of water, the government arrives with a brand new set of clipboards. They announce a task force on flames, they create an office of fire awareness, and they hold a press conference about historic fire mitigation targets. But the house keeps burning. And for a while, it sounded like they understood the urgency. For a while, there was talk of a new government and a new plan. They promised the most ambitious housing plan in nearly a century. They used words like revolutionary, transformative, historic. Those are their words. But what did Canadians actually get? They got Bill C20. None of what they said. Just tinkering around the edges, more of the same thinking that got us exactly to this point in the first place. You want to know the headline feature of this bill? You wouldn't believe it. It is yet another housing bureaucracy. Housing bureaucracy number 4. And what did the first 3 deliver? Well, they doubled the price of homes, they doubled rent, they doubled mortgage costs, and they sent housing construction into an absolute tailspin. And now, in this year, we're supposed to, according to the government's own numbers, we're supposed to build 500,000 new homes just to keep up with demand. This new bureaucracy will add 5,000. 5,000. That is a rounding error, Mr. Speaker, at the cost of $13 billion. Not a rounding error. $13 billion for a government that believes that if you study a crisis long enough, and you write enough reports, and you make enough announcements, reality somehow happens by press release. But here's the truth. No one can live inside a housing accelerator. That was part of their first plan. No one raises their children in a federal task force. That was their second plan. No one calls bureaucracy home. Builders build homes. Workers build homes. Communities actually build homes. Government's job is to get out of the way rather than standing in it. And if this government is short on ideas, I'm going to be happy to help. In fact, we're going to help them throughout this entire debate. And maybe there's a bill that can come back to the House that's actually supportable. Those that get in the way, you cannot possibly reward them. Incentivize cities to actually build homes, not the paperwork. Sell federal land, empty buildings so that families can actually live in them. Cut the federal GST on new homes for everyone, up to $1.3 million to get buyers buying and builders building. And I know that they're thinking about that because the plan that they actually brought forward on cutting GST for first-time home buyers on new homes under $1 million isn't actually working, and they know that. So I invite them to go back to the drawing board. I don't really care how they do it. They just need to do it. It's not rocket science. But clinging to ideology is a really, really powerful blindfold on the other side. They always just get halfway there. And sometimes you have to wonder if they're comfortable with this being the new reality, where those young people that I talked about don't believe that they'll ever buy a home. And maybe that's the entire plan. Maybe the plan is to give up on the dream of home ownership, a permanent class of renters forever. The only problem is that's not the Canadian promise. It's not how we've lived for generations. It's not how anybody wants to live. The Canadian promise was very, very simple. You work hard, you save, you play by the rules, you build a life. It's not like you don't rent that life forever. The answer to a crisis today is created by too much government interference. Certainly, we're seeing that today, but it can't be another study or another agency. And every month you wait with the same plan over and over again, another young person believes that that dream is not for them. And again, maybe that is the plan. Mr. Speaker, in a country where people stop believing they can build a future is a country that's headed in the wrong direction. It's a country where it gets hollowed out by the youngest, smartest people in our society that really want to attain that dream that was promised to them, end up looking elsewhere. Unfortunately, the bill that we have in front of us proves that the government still doesn't understand. Canadians don't need another government program that sounds good in a press release and fails in reality. It doesn't do the very things that this government itself admitted it needed to do at the beginning of its term. And a year later, we're here with yet another announcement of another federal bureaucracy run by another insider. People need homes. We need supply. They need costs to come down. It's really not that complicated. Builders are telling this government the exact same thing. What's required? Get out of the way, cut taxes, cut red tape, and let them build. C20, unfortunately, does none of that. Conservatives believe that there is a solution to the housing crisis, but it's not bigger government. It's more homes. And until the government understands that basic fact, Canadians keep paying the price. Over the course of the last 10 years, a year of this pretend new government with all of the same ministers sitting in the front benches and all of the same people piping in on the same exact policy, we've seen housing prices double, rent double, a payment on a mortgage double, and now you see an absolute stalling of new construction in housing. And they know the problem. They've admitted the problem. In fact, the fix that they put forward before this piece of legislation was part of the problem. Now, I know they're thinking about announcing a wider GST cut, but we continue to hear about that over and over and over again, and it never actually happens. So I don't know why they didn't put that in this piece of legislation. At least there would be a piece of it that we could support, a full-on GST cut for homes under 1.3 million for everyone, no matter what. They have to do a few other things, but we could at least support that measure. And hopefully the government will revise this legislation to include some of our suggestions on lowering development charges and cutting red tape and lowering the price of cost of housing so that young people one day will be able to afford a home in this country.
Une question et commentaire dans le secteur parlementaire.
Merci. It's really ironic to hear the Conservatives talk about ideology and pretending to defend young Canadians when they voted against all measures to improve housing affordability for young Canadians. They voted against GST cuts for first-time home buyer, expanding mortgage criteria, first home savings account, and most recently they voted against Bill C20, which proposed a specific housing strategy for young Canadians. So really, and just today, they're looking down again on home renters. So, you know, we know which side they stand for. So the only question for my colleague is, which Canadian are you standing for? Are they standing for, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable member for Thornhill.
I'm not sure that's the burden she thinks it is. We stand on the side of young people who want to afford a house in this country, and she is part of a government that has doubled housing prices, doubled rent, doubled mortgage payments, and has sat comfortably here while they've done it. Builders have asked you to lower development charges. Builders have asked you for things that they want in order to get housing done, and they have done absolutely none of it. So it's not very hard to say that we're on the house of home ownership in this country.
Some comments through the chair. Question et commentaire. L'honorable député de Gaspésie.
The honourable member for Gaspésie-de-la-Madeleine, Listigouche. I'd like to thank my colleague for the speech. We share concerns about Build Canada Homes, and the concern is that it will be a large bureaucratic organization which will be far away from the actual action on the ground, and that it will be unmotivated. For example, in my riding, one project got a letter saying that the project was turned down because of the competitiveness of the program. So what does my colleague think would be a good way to improve the organization if possible?
For Thornhill.
In terms of what would improve the organization, there's no question that the federal government has a role to play in housing, but the role is not one of an organization, a role that picks winners and losers in a market. It's one that doesn't distort market conditions to allow these things to be built. It's one where GST can be taken off of new homes. It's one where you can incentivize municipalities based on their approval of building permits or their lowering of those development charges, whether you would grant them federal infrastructure dollars or not. That's the government's role in all of this. There are plenty that they can do, but none of us, an additional bureaucracy will do any of that. In fact, it will result in more of the exact same that we've seen over the last 10 years.
And comments. Question et commentaire. The honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government. To the honourable member for Hamilton West End, Custer Dundas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It always astounds me when members stand up in this House and have absolutely no clue about what they're talking about on the ground. The member opposite talked about past housing projects. $93.5 million went to the City of Hamilton through the Housing Accelerator Fund. That was used to build nearly 3,000 additional homes and housing units in building growth-related infrastructure. CMHC funding, nearly $200 million went to City Housing Hamilton and affordable housing projects in the City of Hamilton. So before the members stand up and speak nonsense, they should know the facts.
The honourable member for Thornhill.
Nice that member is actually allowed to get up outside of question period. Is not yelling from the peanut gallery. But this program is supposed to deliver 500,000 homes. It's going to deliver 5,000. It's delivered about 5 so far.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. The honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands. About 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thanks to the honourable member for Thornhill. As I look at the creation of Build Canada Homes, I'm particularly interested if the government moved fast and used something rarely used called a special operating agency, which is under Treasury Board rules. I wonder if the lack of transparency involved in that troubles the member for Thornhill.
The honourable member for Thornhill.
The member opposite raises an interesting point. There's a lot of these shadow bureaucracies being set up right outside of the bureaucracy, which has grown, by the way, in a disproportionate way. The member opposite should be interested to know that the government's actually looking to set up another $1.5 billion home to buy excess condo stock off the market. They haven't told anybody about it, but that's certainly what they're dealing with Bureau. So that's yet another program outside of what's being delivered in what is going to be Canada Building Homes, unless they change it and they can get the votes in the House to support it.